As it happened, we went on a honeymoon to Turkey, a generous wedding gift. When we returned, we were tanned and happy, but the euphoria gradually began to fade. I was getting used to my wife, and intimacy no longer caused that frenzied passion that before. Our days became monotonous. We woke up, had breakfast, went to work, came home in the evening, had dinner, and then sat in front of the TV with smartphones in our hands. At some point, I got so bored that I started to remember my old hobby. At first, I was lucky. I was making good money and could afford to buy my wife expensive gifts. But eventually my luck turned away from me, and I not only lost all my money, but also got into debt. I could no longer hide my addiction from my wife. I confessed everything. We sat down together and started planning my recovery. But first I had to pay off my debts. All the gold jewelry I had given my wife in better times had to be pawned. I made a solemn promise never to touch cards again. She believed me, or pretended to believe me, or desperately wanted to. But as soon as I heard about the next poker tournament, I forgot about everything. About my beloved, about my promises, about my debts. The desire to win the grand prize consumed me. My brain shut down, and the vicious cycle began again. I lost, repented, vowed to quit, then feverishly thought of ways to pay off my debts. And each time the only solution was to go back to the gambling table. I don't know how my wife put up with it. She must have loved me very much, or she would have left. She tried everything she could to get me back on track. Eventually, perhaps out of desperation, she told her parents about my addiction. Her mother promised to find a solution. My relationship with my mother-in-law was always polite and formal. No fights, no scheming for my wife's attention. She was a bright woman, always well-groomed, visiting beauty salons and fitness clubs. Every 2 weeks, she renewed her manicure with intricate designs. Her lush bust outshone that of her daughter. She maintained her slim waist with regular visits to the gym and dressed stylishly, flashy but elegant. In some ways, my wife could learn a thing or two from her. She looked like a magazine model. One evening, she invited us to dinner. I wanted to refuse at first, citing urgent business, but her firm tone left no room for argument. When we arrived, the table was already set. She was fluttering in her new dress, tight around her trim figure. My father-in-law was snoozing peacefully in the corner as usual, turning on the TV to give the illusion of being busy. After greeting us, he briefly returned to his appetizers and began methodically devouring them, ignoring the conversation. My mother-in-law, however, was in high spirits, chatting animatedly and making sure my glass was never empty. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was on the table next to me, and before I could react, my mother-in-law glanced at the screen and smirked. Ah, an invitation to the poker club. Dear son-in-law, don't you think you're gambling too much? Isn't it time to redirect that passion in another direction? She teased. I braced myself for a long lecture, but instead, she shocked me with another offer. One that would supposedly cure me of my gambling addiction. I was so stunned that I set aside my fork and stared at her in bewilderment. My wife, exhausted from fighting my addiction, immediately supported her mother. They both turned to me expectantly. Why not try it? My wife said, her tone firm. I doubted the success of any intervention. I'd been playing cards since I was a kid. It was the one pastime I had never abandoned. Follow me, my mother-in-law commanded, rising from the table and heading upstairs with the confident gait of a model. I had no choice but to follow her. Once in the bedroom, she slammed the door shut. You'll walk out of here a different person, she promised. I smirked. We'll see about that. She gestured for me to sit down, and I settled on the edge of the mattress. From the nightstand, she pulled a deck of cards. Not the usual kings and queens, but thought-provoking images. She laid out the cards with practiced ease. The game is simple, she cooed. Whoever loses removes one article of clothing. Confident that I could strip this daring woman down to nothing, I made myself comfortable on the bed. But my luck betrayed me. My mother-in-law, blushing slightly, began leisurely undoing the buttons. I was barely breathing. Don't get distracted. Focus on the game, she playfully chided. And then I lost again. And again. One by one my socks, my t-shirt, my jeans, everything disappeared. I stood before her in my last clothes, humiliated that a woman old enough to be my mother had beaten me. She watched me with amusement, tapping her manicured fingers on the bedpost. And now, my dear son-in-law, it's time to settle the score. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. She reached out and gently took my hand. What happened next, you'll have to figure out for yourself. All I can say is that my mother-in-law was far more resourceful than any young woman I had ever met. My wife paled in comparison. All was quiet downstairs. My wife was watching a talk show, unaware that there was a whole other reality show going on the floor above. My father-in-law was mumbling something in his sleep. I looked around my family and made a vow. No more cards. After all, why would I want to play poker when I had found something much more exciting to do?